Good day to you. Actually, good World Heart Day to you. And welcome wherever you're watching and listening to this Smart Heart seminar, which should take roughly 1 hour. My name's Tim Hutchings. I'm a former Olympic athlete, and I have an atrial fibrillation. I have a less than perfect heart, but it's doing okay for now. Just a first basic piece of housekeeping to each and every one of you. If you have questions, please press the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, at the bottom of the Zoom window, and your questions will be answered at the end of our discussion. So why are we here? Every one of us has a heart. It seems obvious, but most of us take them for granted, this amazing organ for granted. I know I did for many, many years. We're going to discuss issues such as how hard to push our heart during exercise, how healthy is my heart right now, how can its performance, its health, be easily recorded and transmitted remotely to a third party, both live, actually on the run, so to speak, and recorded. We're talking ECG, heart rate, and breathing rate. Now we have some fabulous seminar speakers for you. I'll introduce them very briefly. Ladies first, of course, so appropriately, let me introduce to you former marathon world record holder Paula Radcliffe. Paula, welcome.
Thank you.
We'll also be hearing from Dr. Upendra Kaul, an eminent cardiologist who is currently in Kashmir. Fittingly, he'll talk to us about the benefits of remote monitoring devices, particularly during the pandemic. After Upendra, we'll be hearing from Dr. Ashish Contractor, a runner himself and head of cardiac rehabilitation at one of the largest hospitals in Mumbai. He also has been the medical director of the Mumbai Marathon for many years. Ashish, welcome.
Hi.
Professor John Buckley is with us. Professor Buckley is an internationally recognized specialist in cardiovascular prevention and rehabilitation, as well as a mass of other things. I haven't got the time. It would take hours to go through it all. But John, a very warm welcome to you.
Hello.
Then we'll turn to Tom Gaskell, who has always been physically very active, but who has, rather like myself, experienced what we could loosely call imperfections in the way his ticker has been behaving. So, Tom, welcome to you as well.
Hello.
Finally, we'll hear from Sandeep Sibal, co-founder and CEO of Fourth Frontier, who have developed, built, and launched the Frontier X for a demo of the device's capabilities. Sandeep, welcome to you as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Time is precious, so we'll get cracking. And Paula, first of all, to you. How have you navigated through this year, this bizarre, unique year? How has life changed for you?
Well, I think.
How have you seen exercise and heart health change, Paula?
I think I've seen a lot of things change for a lot of us. A lot of people rethink how they live their lives, how they look after their body and their health. And I think for a long time, we've talked about physical fitness as being a physical fitness and not thought about the impact upon mental health as well. And I think during lockdown, a lot of people turned to exercise, maybe even for the first time, discovering it and using it as a coping mechanism and as a way to stay healthy and maybe raise their chances a little bit of fighting off the virus should they come into contact with it as well. And I think I fully understood beforehand the importance of heart health, having had my mom go through atrial fibrillation like yourself, a couple of cardioversions. The first one didn't work. Second one, we weren't sure whether that had worked, and that was going into lockdown. So she wasn't actually able to see her cardiologist, hasn't seen the specialist since February time. But through the Fourth Frontier and the Frontier X device and the app, she's been able to send through readings all of the time. He's been able to assess and change her medication and treatment accordingly. So it's really been a huge saving point there, I think, for me, like many people worried about parents on their own, not able to get to them, not able to travel to them, but to at least know that they're healthy and being looked after, and to have someone be able to check on that has been very reassuring. And I think for myself too, the first time, if I go back to the first time I used the device, which was when Manav brought the device over to the Great North Run, September of 2019. That first run was very key to me, just to see how comfortable it was, how simple it was, how easy to use, but to get that reassurance that after years, I guess, of kind of pushing my body and my heart to achieve things and to pushing it to its limits, that I hadn't actually caused any lasting damage, and that I could still see reassuringly for myself that the readings were good, and can still keep an eye on that through lockdown and through all the different traumas that we all faced in that period.
Okay, thanks, Paula. That's fascinating, and it's obviously been a very pertinent and useful advice for you and your mum. So really a very personal story from you there. It seems that an awful lot of people in these bizarre times have been unable to visit hospitals, see their GPs, or go to clinics on account of the pandemic. And we've asked Dr. Upendra Kaul, an eminent cardiologist who's currently in Kashmir up in northern India, organising a cardiovascular health camp in remote districts, about the role of remote monitoring devices during the pandemic. It's incredibly apt at this particular time. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
I think it's a wonderful thing. Remote devices are the things for the future, and also in the present era. And they were, important in the otherwise also pre-COVID era also, but then it was not so much realized. Now that we know, if we get an episode of palpitation and we want to record the ECG at that particular time, it is impossible to go to ECG machine and get it tied down by the time palpitation may even disappear. So if you have such a device, you just attach it to their body. If you record it, you can see it and you can immediately transfer it by any other method. WhatsApp is one of ways you can transmit it through a video call or transmit it through any other. You see, you can also record it. You can keep it recorded and stored and send it. So immediately, especially patients with heart failure, they get episodes like atrial fibrillation. If you remember, your grandfather, had as low ejection fraction, he's being treated, and you put this on and you showed me that was atrial fibrillation. And atrial fibrillation with an elderly person with other comorbidities is a predisposer for strokes, which can be devastating. So starting them on anticoagulants is very important. So you can screen these patients, start them on anticoagulants, and get them out of this fear. And also other arrhythmias, the patients can get some arrhythmias which need an ICD. A patient with a low ejection fraction, if you show an episode of ventricular tachycardia, white QRS complex coming in a row, is a patient. Any patient with low ejection fraction, less than 35%, is prone to sudden death. And if you see these episodes, you know that he is already demonstrated a part of it. So they are to be given ICD, an implantable cardiovascular defibrillator. So it can pick up many things. If the patient complains of severe chest discomfort, you put this machine on, and of course you're not getting 12-lead ECG, but it shows one of the chest leads. And chest leads are quite sensitive in picking up heart attack changes. It may be ST depression, ST elevation. If you know his previous ECG was normal and now it is showing a marked deviation of the ST segment, you're handling a person with acute ischemia, and acute ischemia needs very rapid, immediate treatment. So this could be communicated to the physician. At least he would be started on aspirin, some blood thinner, a high dose of statin, and asked to come to the hospital. And although hospitals had a difficulty, but then acute emergencies were running. All the acute emergency centers were running. I used to come to hospital and I must have saved at least 6 to 7 certain deaths of acute heart attack. I used to come and do it. And the labs were easily accessible. The overcrowding of the chronic patients wasn't there, and we were ready to help these patients. So I think that is one of the very important things to have such devices to be popularized, to be made available, to be kept in a not very expensive, and so that they are available, and they should be ultimately available like a BP instrument with a good chemist, so that they can easily get it.
Very interesting.
Well, many thanks to Upendra for recording that. Paula, I think you and I both know that there is a great irony in the fact that heart attacks can be treated, whereas strokes have much more devastating consequences quite often, and it's hard to predict, if you like, unless your heart is being monitored.
Yes, absolutely, and that's why I think being able to have this reassurance in place. I think whether you're a top athlete pushing your body, or whether you're indeed a patient who's gone through heart surgery and is then recovering from that, trying to get back to normal life, normal activities, or if you're just somewhere in the middle and just want a general check on your health, this device is it's so simple and easy to use. I think that for me is the strongest and most unique point about it. The fact that my mom can just strap it on with a couple of quick lessons. She can work out how to open the app, how to download it, how to charge the device, and how to send the files off to her cardiologist, who in turn can quickly learn how to access the files and look at them.
And of course, that reassurance for you is so much more pertinent with your mum being here in the UK and you're sitting down in the south of France enjoying slightly warmer weather, I'm sure, than we've got here. I'm going to turn to Ashish now. Ashish, contractor. Ashish, head of cardiac rehabilitation at one of the largest hospitals in Mumbai, a city of some 20 million people plus. You've been medical director of the Mumbai Marathon, the biggest running event in India, for many years. I've attended that many times, and a runner yourself. Ashish, how do you think people should manage outdoor exercise in these very bizarre times with the risk of contracting COVID-19? It's very, very difficult, and people are uncertain.
Yeah. So hi, Tim, and a very happy World Heart Day to everyone. I feel embarrassed when you call me a runner in the presence of Paula Radcliffe, but yes, I do jog along once in a while. To answer your specific question, where exercise and COVID is concerned, you have two types of people: those who've been exercising all along, and those who, like Paula said, are today turning to exercise to kind of help them with their physical and mental health. So some of the important points that we need to make is that exercise definitely helps with your immunity, but exercise and immunity have what we call a J-shaped relationship. What that means is you get the best immunity from exercise when your exercise is at the most moderate level. When you don't exercise at all, or you're pushing yourself really, really hard, your immunity actually drops temporarily. So obviously, if you're a marathon runner and you're training very hard, you might momentarily have a drop in immunity. So during these times, my one piece of advice would be do not push yourself beyond what is your usual capacity. So don't try and hit new goals or hit personal bests during this period, because we need to keep our immunity at an optimum level, which is with moderate intensity exercise. The second point I'd like to make is that when you're exercising outdoors, your risk of contracting the virus actually is extremely low, because ultimately the virus is spread through droplets or aerosols, which means two people need to come into contact with each other. And if they're talking, breathing, shouting, sneezing, the virus transmits. So when you're outdoors, and if you can maintain a distance of at least 6 feet with the person nearest you, then the risk of contracting the virus is low. However, for moderate intensity exercise, say brisk walking, I would certainly recommend having the mask on. If you're doing something of a higher intensity, for example, you're running hard, it becomes very difficult to breathe with the mask on. I would still recommend having the mask on, but maybe, instead of around your neck, you just kind of around your nose and mouth, you just lower it around your neck temporarily. And as long as you can maintain distance, which sometimes in a city like Mumbai, as you very well know, can be hard to do. If you can maintain distance, then it's fine for your mask to be down. You sort of can let your guard down, so to speak. But the moment you get into an area where, again, you cannot maintain distance, please make sure you put it back on. The other point is that when you're exercising with a mask, your perceived intensity tends to be higher, which means it's slightly harder to breathe kind of with the mask on. So if you were previously, walking at, say, a pace of covering a kilometer in 10 minutes, you can slow it down to cover that same kilometer in 10.5 or 11 minutes. So your rate of perceived exertion kind of remains the same. So I think these are some of the factors you need to take into account when you're exercising outdoors. One more point I want to make about exercise is that today 29 million people have been affected by COVID, which means we got, and fortunately not, the death rate is relatively low in comparison to the number of people that have been affected. But if you've been affected by COVID, and even if you have recovered, please make sure you build up very gradually. Because again, this is a disease where we are learning new things every day. And we're finding out that even 2 months later or 3 months later, people have effects on their lung, which is called pulmonary fibrosis, or even on the heart, which is called myocarditis. It's an inflammation of the heart muscle caused by the virus. So you've had young athletes reporting sort of extreme breathlessness. And when they've done scans like MRIs, they have found myocarditis. So if you have recovered from COVID, make sure you ease into exercise and you take your time kind of getting back to where you were. I think that part is very important. During the pandemic, a lot of our cardiac patients who would normally come to the hospital, so I work at the Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital in Mumbai. So the patients who usually used to come to the hospital stopped coming, obviously because there were restrictions of movement and lockdown. So we had them exercising at home. And luckily, because we had the device, because we had the Frontier X, we could send it to their house and they sort of wore the strap. And real time, we were monitoring their ECG to make sure it was safe. Through that, we also measured a term called the Qtc interval. You might have heard that in the earlier part of the pandemic, that people were taking certain drugs to take care of the virus, and that was increasing what was known as their Qtc interval, and that put them at higher risk for arrhythmias. Not the atrial arrhythmias, which you spoke about, but ventricular arrhythmias, which could actually be more dangerous. So we were able to measure their Qtc to make sure it was within a safe limit. So luckily, most of our patients continue their exercise, albeit at home, but with a reduced intensity, and we were able to monitor it. So thankfully, we went through this pandemic with this help, and we were able to continuously monitor our patients. And one of the silver lining among this otherwise very, very dark cloud is that hopefully going forward, patients who physically cannot come into places, into tertiary care centers, and they live in remote areas, they can still be monitored, and we can be reassured that sort of everything is going on okay with them.
Ashish, thank you. Some fascinating advice there for people who are healthy but just like to exercise, or for people who have indeed had COVID-19 in recent months. Thank you very much indeed. We're privileged to have with us as well Professor John Buckley, who's been at the forefront of cardiac rehabilitation for a long time, and has been a witness to all developments in this field. So, Professor Buckley, how do you see the landscape of cardiac rehab changing on account of the pandemic? It's affecting almost every aspect of modern life, and going beyond it, beyond the pandemic.
Yes. Well, we know that the area of the COVID pandemic that we're only going to be able to measure in the future is its effects on everything else. And we know that a lot of people haven't gone into hospital, even in an emergency situation, for their heart conditions. So we've sort of reduced people coming in for medical treatment. And then that means that those people aren't then going on to rehabilitation as well. And then the pandemic has pretty much had a huge effect on the delivery of rehabilitation services. So the patients who are getting that special advice from the nurses and supporting the doctors with the medications and some of the mental health issues of coming to terms with the disease, to getting to your physio, your exercise practitioner to help you with your exercise, all of those have also been stopped to a certain extent or had to be readapted. Ashish and myself, we're very privileged to be a part of an international collaboration for cardiovascular prevention and rehabilitation. And we belong to an international society which is linked to the World Heart Federation, who is hosting today's World Heart Day. And we've got two really top researching colleagues in Toronto who surveyed all the cardiac rehab programs in the world. And they show that 50% of the cardiac rehabilitation programs had shut down as a result. So not only were fewer patients coming in to be treated, but then half, again, weren't getting the supportive elements of rehabilitation and it's as much about the exercise as it is about the support and reassurance and mental elements, and that's what the rehabilitation does. So in our experiences in the UK is that, in fact, for the last 30 years, the UK has actually prided itself on having home-based cardiac rehabilitation, and we produced research in the UK showing that it's just as effective as having rehabilitation in a hospital or a clinic. But when our team in our national society here, the BACPR in the UK, got together to discuss that, the one glitch in it was that the normal services meant that either there was a healthcare practitioner going to somebody's house to assess them, or the patients had started their rehabilitation a little bit in the hospital so we could assess them and have confidence to see how they respond to exertion and any things, and then they could go away and do their exercise at home. And we were okay until about May in the UK, because the patients had started with the clinicians in the hospitals or the clinics or the community centers, and then we're able to continue on and we could support them from home. But now most of those people have completed their programs, and hopefully they'll keep going. They've got the confidence, and some of them can get back to some of their gyms or go to the gyms to see a qualified practitioner. But it's the new patients that we need to find a way to be able to monitor and assess. And so if we can have devices that can monitor the patients live, and we can get that information while they're exercising, and if we can somehow work out emergency procedures with them, if they can have somebody else at their side with them, this could open up a whole new ball game in rehabilitation. But we have to be bold. And I'm thinking back to the 1950s and 60s, where people were afraid to exercise people with heart problems, and we don't appreciate that now. A guy named Hellerstein in the United States got his patients on a bed within the first week after a heart attack, and everybody was horrified because they were supposed to stay in bed for 2 or 3 weeks. And he showed that these people would go back to work and have much better lives if they got active as soon as possible. And then following on from that, a guy named Terry Kavanagh in Toronto, he was getting his patients and he was taking them to the New York Marathon after their cardiac rehabilitation. So, you know, and we've now got modern medical treatment that really can make patients that much more stable compared to 30, 40 years ago. So, but we do need to be able to monitor people and see how they're getting on. And, you know, our Australian friends have been used to doing telemedicine because they're so spread out. But still, there were always this place where the patient started in a hospital under the guise of a specialist. We now have to find ways of seeing people remotely, and that's what's exciting about these new developments in monitoring.
Professor Buckley, thank you very much indeed. I mean, I think, you know, you've spoken very eloquently there about the vast value and potential in a device that is so small, can be posted to somebody very easily, that can be worn 24/7, big memory, big battery life, can give live signals to anybody in the world who is on the other end. So powerful words from yourself. Thank you. Speaking of personal experiences, and I know that, you know, so many of us have had issues. We have a very interesting guest who himself has a background in electronic product development and used to play tennis and windsurf, bit of an action man. We're going to listen to his story because it's truly fascinating and could apply to any one of us. So Tom Gaskell, tell us a bit about yourself and your heart. I think we're members of the same club in a way.
Yeah, I think we are. It was summer 2018, and I was an unfit, overweight, 63-year-old business consultant. My local lake, Grafham Water, shortly after the end of my windsurfing session, I had no warning, there was no chest pain, I just suddenly, for no obvious reason, went into cardiac arrest. My friends were able to do CPR and use the local defibrillator, And within an hour, I was at Papworth Hospital having a stent fitted. Great shock. I then went on, as we were hearing a moment ago, on to Papworth's brilliant 12-week cardiac rehab program. That was to build my fitness and my confidence after the events. Bought myself an Apple Watch to monitor my heart rate and my ECG. And what the ECG side of it showed me was I had some odd ectopic heartbeats or palpitations. So a 7-day Holter monitor test was arranged, and this suggested these were really quite benign and nothing to worry about. So I kept exercising. But just over a year later, on holiday in Greece, again with no warning, no obvious reason, no chest pain or anything, I had heart attack number 2. The local hospital in Rhodes tried to give me a new stent, but they weren't able to, and I was just confined to 10 days bed rest, now sent home with heart failure. So I went to another cardiac rehab program at Papworth, which helped me rebuild strength, fitness and confidence. In January this year, I had 2 new stents fitted at Papworth, followed by cardiac rehab program number 3. Now, this time with COVID-19 threatening everybody, I wanted to build my heart strength to the maximum possible. So I started running for the first time in our local park. And I combined this with the home exercises from Papworth, and I did it at the optimum level, 90 minutes a day, 6 days a week, within my heart rate target limits. I got offered a ETT, an exercise treadmill test, with a view to putting my heart rates up. Great, I can do more. But this was stopped partway through because I started having some quite nasty ectopic heartbeats. That's where the heartbeats are out of place and the wrong shape, and the heart doesn't actually work properly. So instead of doing all this and then putting my heart rate limit up so I can run faster, they actually put my heart rate limit down. Great, thanks a lot. It was suggested that I tried a Frontier X monitor, which would show ECGs during exercise. The Apple Watch can't do this. You've got to be sort of stationary and calm to take an ECG. And when I stop running, I don't get the bad ectopics. I've got to be actually moving to get them. And the Frontier X instead showed my ECG and cardiac strain and exertion and heart rate throughout every exercise session. And what it showed was, as I was warming up for exercise, not at the peak, not at the beginning, but during warm-up, I will get ectopics. Normally just 1, 2, or 3 beats of ectopics, which is safe, but on 2 occasions, much longer episodes of up to 22 beats, which weren't. These were, as I understand, ventricular tachycardia, which is not good. I couldn't tell they were happening. I was symptom-free. I couldn't feel them, but they were happening. So I was fitted with a 24-hour Holter monitor. Results from that, nothing at all. Some short bursts, but no long ones. On the basis of that, my consultant said, look, there's no need to do anything. You're fine. Then I shared my Frontier X results with him. And he could see that the short ectopics visible on the Holter results and the long bursts that I'd shown on the Frontier X had the same shape, they came from the same source, they had the same trigger mechanism, and this completely changed the prognosis. We do now need to do something. So I go into Papworth next week for an ablation procedure. When I first talked to my cardiologists about the Frontier X, they were a bit apprehensive. You could see them thinking, oh, here we go again. Another anxious patient with a gadget, mountains of data, what are we going to do? I have to be responsible. I've got to monitor my results. I've got to learn what data I do need to share. So when there is something important, like my long VT bursts, I can share the Frontier X results at the specific points at which issues occurred, not expect them to troll through everything. Without this, we might never have known. We wouldn't have known I had an ectopic problem. I would probably increase my exercise, done more, done it faster for longer. There was a real risk of the ectopics getting out of control. I could very easily have become that guy who drops dead when running in the park. That's why it seems to me that health and fitness are becoming effectively democratized. They're becoming collaborative. It's more now a partnership, I think, between the cardiologists, the rehab and fitness experts, the device suppliers and their systems, and me. I have to say, I find that really empowering and reassuring. I'm really grateful for it. Tim.
Well, I'm very grateful for that little story, Tom. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, you know, I absolutely understand the difference between being able to just run, wearing a little device that you forget about around your chest, and having to stop and do that every so often during a run, where your body state is immediately changing. So that was very powerful, and I'm delighted you're still with us. I've had a couple of ablations. It's lovely. It's just a couple of hours of very deep sleep in my experience. So good luck with that next week. And thank you very much for that. Quite a story. But since we've spoken so much about the Frontier X and how it is addressing key needs of users and experts, let's go over to Sandeep, the CEO of Fourth Frontier and co-founder. They've designed and built the Frontier X for a demo. Sandeep, I know you're incredibly passionate about this for a number of reasons, but please do tell us more.
Thanks so much, Tim, and welcome to all the participants. Happy World Heart Day to you all. Very quickly, I'm going to talk a bit about the device that's been referenced by Tom earlier and by many of the other panelists. This little device, I don't know if you can see it, it's worn on a little strap around the chest, quite like a heart rate monitor, but really it's more like a little smartphone. It's about 20 grams, very light. It's got a screen, you know, it runs a little operating system, and when you wear it around the chest, it can pick up all kinds of things about your heart, your lungs, and your movements. So it analyzes on the fly as you're moving the signals coming out from your heart, every single beat, every single breath, and every single step. And while it analyzes this, it also provides you hints during the time that you're wearing it with little discrete buzzes, letting you know if you're exerting yourself beyond a certain limit that may not be good for your heart, if you're overstraining the heart, you know, if your exertion levels are not sustainable, you're crossing your ventilatory thresholds, and so on. The product, this little Frontier X, was actually designed initially more for sportsmen, but the value for cardiac health has actually increased, especially during the COVID era. In the interest of time, I'm going to quickly show you some of the data that you can actually see from the device. So the device, in addition to analyzing things on the fly and ensuring that you're not overstraining yourself, also records all the data for viewing later on your smartphone or on a big screen. To give you an idea of what you actually see, and this is similar to what Tom was referring to a few minutes ago, I'm actually going to share my screen, and you're going to actually see this. I hope things work fine. So I'm going to actually show you an idea of a dashboard. Tim, can you see this?
I can indeed. Yes, that's fine.
Yeah. So here's an idea of the dashboard. Here's what you actually see. So every single session, you know, you see this numbers, serial numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. It gives you an idea of the activity type. You can edit that. You can put in some notes if you like, the duration, the training load, which means how much work have you put into that, an idea of the effort that the body's put, the maximum strain on the heart. You know, blue is very little, yellow is higher, orange is higher, red is in a zone that you should not be. And then, of course, the rhythm. You see these little pie charts. Blue is when the rhythm's fine, yellow when it's off, and red it's when you're in AFib. So as you can see, a lot of these, you know, denote different things. If you click on any of these, this is what you're going to see. You're actually going to see over the course, this is a recording for over, you know, a little over 70 minutes. You can see your heart rate. There it is. Let's say heart rate. As you can see, this is a person who's been running, pushes himself, slows down, and then pushes himself again. The cardiac strain. Blue is when the strain is low. Green, yellow is when it's significant. Orange is when you need to be a little concerned, and red is really a zone you should not be in. The QT interval, which Dr. Ashish Contractor mentioned, is also useful, especially in this context, perhaps not as much, but if you're on medication like hydroxychloroquine and so on, you can get an idea of the QT intervals, could be very valuable. And the breath rate. And the breath rate is quite interesting because it's a very good marker of the perceived effort. that Paula was talking about. And if you can notice these little green lines, these are actually effort alerts. This gentleman had set his effort alert to 45 breaths per minute. So every time he crosses it, he gets a little buzz on the chest, telling him that he's exceeding it. It also measures body shock. That's a rate of change of impact on your feet and traveling up through your body. Cadence, altitude, you can see it's a hilly run, the speed, and also the route if you're running with a smartphone. So this is some of the data. Finally, also want to mention that you can, to Tom's point, if you're feeling palpitations, if you have some problem, you can always press the little red button and you can mark this event, this black line, for when you can go back and look at what happened at that time. And every single point, as I roll this cursor, is 20 seconds of data. And as you can see, there's there's data being shown on top. As I roll this black ball, you can see that the data changes, and you can actually see the ECG on top, 20 seconds of it, right? So the entire ECG is recorded and analyzed. Now I have, before I turn this back over to you, Tim, I want to point out a couple of interesting examples. Here's a gentleman. He's actually a younger, he's a little bit over 30 years. He's a 2-hour, 15-minute marathoner, an Olympic aspirant. And he actually didn't know when he was running, he seemed to be doing fine, and he's fine. But whenever he stopped running during recovery, he noticed that he actually had arrhythmias. As you can see, the ECG on top, the beats are irregular. He actually wasn't aware of this until he actually wore the device. And later on cardiologists did a more detailed study on him, and he's now been treated and he's back to running. So here's an example of a person who's used the product to actually identify his issues. Now, this is another example of a person who actually had a bit of a cardiac history, had to have a stent put in, and he has very high cardiac strain at levels that are not healthy. As you can see, if you look at his ECG, you can clearly see the ST depression, the ST segment depression, which is really what the cardiac strain parameter talks about. And the red lines are when he got buzzed, when he was getting into the red zone. Before he got into the red zone, he got a double buzz telling him that he needs to back off. So if you notice, he never really goes into the red zone. He gets a buzz when he's in the orange zone, telling him that don't push beyond that. It may not be good for the heart. Essentially what cardiac strain is ST depression, and beyond a certain level, it could lead to ischemia. And exercise-induced ischemia for long periods is not considered healthy. It could lead to damage as well. So here's an example of a person using a device to ensure that he's running in the right zone. Finally, I want to give an example of a live ECG. And this live ECG is actually coming off of a device worn by my co-founder, Manav Bhushan. You can see his ECG streaming live with a latency of less than a minute. Essentially, the device is Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. It can actually beam out the ECG, and anybody, anywhere can actually look at it. And this is actually pretty cool. This is something that, folks can, I could actually do a little demo of this. And if you look at the chat box, if you're listening in, click on the chat box. There's a little link in there which says, http live.heartos.org. If you click on that, you can also see his ECG. So anyone who's on this Zoom seminar, if you click on the little button, which actually has a chat, you can see the link. Click on the link, and you can see his live ECG being streamed. And this is very useful for the examples that Dr. Upendra Kaul talked about for remote monitoring as well. So these are some of the features I wanted to talk about, Tim, and I'm actually going to stop sharing and turn this back to you. I hope this provides a perspective on why this product has been utilized to solve many of the issues that have been talked about earlier in the seminar.
Thanks, Sandeep. Yeah, that was all fascinating. There's one thing I just wanted to explain is the buzz that you're alluding to. For people who are not familiar with the device, it basically means that the little device vibrates against your chest when you enter if you go above a certain limit that you preset in the device. That's the buzz you're referring to. It's actually a little vibration against your chest, which is you can feel very easily. And it's probably unique in that respect.
That's right. The fact that it can give you instant real-time feedback ensures that you're not just analyzing things after the run, but even during the run, you ensure that you're running in the right zone, in the optimum zone. That's safe for you.
And it's also remarkable that you can be running with a device and your cardiac specialist can see your data live, whether he's in his local hospital 10 miles down the road or sitting in Sydney, Australia, around the other side of the world. He can be monitoring your heart performance as you are producing the performance. I mean, that is mind-boggling.
Indeed. In fact, in the last Mumbai Marathon, we had a bunch of runners run with the device, and we could actually see the live data streaming as they were running, far away, really anywhere.
So, Sandy, I mean, thanks for that fascinating demo. How exactly is the Frontier X different from the wrist-worn ECG watches?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a couple of ECG watches that have made it to the market, from Fitbit and Apple and so on. And essentially, they also do provide the ECG signal. There are a couple of differences, though, which are very important. One is that it requires you to actually put your other hand, a finger of the other hand on the crown of the watch to actually close the circuit and then measure the ECG. So while you can do a spot check when you're stationary for some time, you really can't use it when you're active, when you're running or cycling or doing anything that requires your hands to be in motion. That's one of the challenges. So while you can do a spot check, the continuous monitoring, it doesn't really work out. That's one. The other is also the fact that the ECG is being picked off on the wrist and not the chest. What that means is because of the quality of the ECG, many of the features and the morphologies that cardiologists look for cannot be found on the wrist. Many of the interesting things that we're doing on the chest really are difficult to do, if not impossible, on the wrist. So I'd say these are two of the areas which sort of limits the ECG watches. Just a very high level sort of perspective on that question.
Thanks, Andy. Now I know that some of the data we've been showing and some of the phrases used will be familiar to many people watching who are perhaps medics, perhaps cardiologists, but more familiar with this whole world. But it will be puzzling to many ordinary Joe Blow users who want to buy this device, know that it's got huge potential, get some of the rough idea of what it's capable of, but actually need a little bit more guidance. And I'd like to speak to Ashish about the cardiac athlete program that appears to be a new offering. As a long-time marathon runner, Ashish, and I've seen you before and after the Mumbai Marathon, and a cardiac rehab specialist. How do you view this offering, the cardiac athlete program, and do you think it might help people?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think it can definitely help people. As Tom explained earlier, that pretty much everyone with a cardiac diagnosis is told to exercise. We know that exercise is both good at preventing heart disease as well as treating it. But when you are exercising, there's always this sort of apprehension about safety. And as Sandeep said, if you're monitored, every breath you take, every step you take, the way the police said it in 1983, we'll be watching you. So the point is that if somebody is being monitored, we know exactly what's going on. And I think if somebody is fresh off an event, say the first 2 weeks or 3 weeks or even 2 months after a cardiac event, it would be good for them to go to a hospital-based program, just the way Tom did. But once they're out on their own for the rest of their life, and they want to do something more than just brisk walking, say they want to run from couch to 5K or they want to run a 10K, it would be great to have them monitored. So the way this device works is you can download your data either real time and have someone monitor it, or you can download it and then send it up to the cloud and it can be reviewed regularly. So the idea of the cardiac athlete program is that anyone with a cardiac event, as long as they're deemed to be low risk from a risk stratification point of view, they can move on to be an athlete. An athlete doesn't necessarily mean an Olympic medal winner. It's just the inner athlete within them can come out, but come out with monitoring. Because most often, even the family members, I see it in India all the time, when my patients come and they're running marathons, their family members are worried that they are running. And I tell them, you should be worried if they're not running. The fact that they're running is great. It's just that we need to do it with some care, with some precaution. So if somebody is monitoring them in the background and giving them regular feedback, I think you can get great insights. So, Tom's story was absolutely spot on. I mean, he monitored himself and he was his own doctor, so to speak. But, even the 24-hour halter or 48-hour halter didn't pick it up. But by checking himself regularly, day after day or week after week, he did pick up an abnormality and now he's getting it addressed. So I think being monitored has a lot of benefits.
Jim, if you don't mind, I'd like to add a couple more lines here. To build on what Ashish mentioned, the cardiac athlete program is really almost a service on top of the product. And it actually came about because many of the folks who were looking at the data said, look, this stuff is a little too technical for us, right? We understand that the product can provide all this data. And while folks like Tom can look at it themselves and pick things up, and look at all of this and digest it, people were looking for someone to speak with, an expert perhaps. So the cardiac athlete program is really something that gives you the opportunity for a one-on-one with an expert who's actually looking over what you're doing, and you can speak with a person, once a week and actually get an idea. And the person can not just tell you about what you've done that week, but also monitor your progress, week after week. So it's really something that provides, closes the loop for a lot of the users. So it provides the product itself, with the AI algorithms running on the device and the cloud can do a lot. But this adds that little extra, expert input and advice, which a lot of people have asked for. And in fact, today is the day we are actually launching it. It's a pilot launch initially for those in India, but this will be opened up for others across the world very soon. The program itself, and I can detail the offer. It's 2,500 rupees per month. We've got a 20% discount for a week. You can read up on the details at the end of the talk. So that's as far as the cardiac athlete program goes. It's really something that we're adding on beyond the Frontier X product itself. Thanks.
Okay, Ashish and Sandeep, thank you very much indeed. We've discussed a lot about the new developments and technologies that are available. So just to summarize, I'm going to ask each of our speakers to summarize and ask them about a future post-COVID world. I mean, it's frightening times we're going through, and frightening, and again, because we don't know what we're going to be going through in the future. What is going to change with respect to healthcare, exercise, and the relevance of the new technologies and products that we've discussed today. So first of all, we'll stick with the format. Ladies first. Paula, just summarize your thoughts.
Thanks, Tim. Well, I mean, I think my main thoughts are that much as we're seeing from a business point of view, a lot of people had the opportunity to work from home, see how well conferences like this and Zoom work, and have chosen to continue doing so because they actually find it's more productive. Maybe we're going to move that way for healthcare as well, in terms of wherever you are, your consultant can access your data, look at it, look at the live ECG, and can follow you remotely. And from the same desk can monitor several people in lots of different places almost at the same time. And so maybe also be more productive, but certainly give them better care all the way through. And I think that's what's really exciting about this device and about the cardiac athlete program, and the way that backup is being provided to the cardiologists, to the specialists, and to the people using it, so that from both sides, it's easy to use, it's simple, you can't really get it wrong, you just kind of put it on, strap it on. Once you know what you're doing with it, that data is accessible and can be used and can save lives, can certainly lengthen them, and protect people. So aside from all of the benefits that we'd already seen for athletes with breathing rate related exertion, getting the most out of their training and their performance, we're now seeing bigger health benefits, which are very exciting, and maybe without this whole COVID experience we wouldn't have gotten to.
Thanks, Paula. Ashish, I'll come to you next. I mean, we all like the reassurance of being able to sit down with a specialist, with a cardiologist, and chat. face-to-face, but the ability with devices of this power, this capability to remotely liaise with patients creates a seismic shift, really, in the world we live in at the moment.
Absolutely. I think my closing thoughts, Tim, are that exercise is medicine. Exercise has been medicine before COVID, and it'll continue being the best pill in the world even after COVID. If you could put all the benefits in one pill, that would be the best seller in the world. I loved a line that Tom used, and I'm going to steal it. He said that exercise is being democratized, which means that today, whether you're using exercise for performance or for health, you can actually monitor data accurately. If you're using it for performance, share it with your coach, discuss the results. If you're using it for health, share it with your doctor and see the way forward. And I think that if we measure what matters, we can all live a healthier life and make sure that exercise is a part of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Ashish. Professor Buckley, John, just your final thoughts on this.
I'm quite interested in preaching to the unconverted. And our statistics show that more than half of the patients who are eligible and referred to cardiac rehabilitation do not go. And those are the people who are probably less fit and less well. And therefore, probably any activity in those people's lives is maybe fitness training. They don't even have to call it exercise. If they can play with their grandchildren a little bit more, they can get out and do their own shopping or whatever. And yet those people might find that they have symptoms and they're challenged simply by activities of daily life, because we do have quite a bit. And if we improve their fitness just a little bit, we get actually more benefit than taking a fitter person and giving them the same amount of improvement. So I think it might be a way of simply saying to some people who are exercise averse, have this monitor, go about your day-to-day life, and let's evaluate how much effort you do in your normal day-to-day life. Because if they're actually quite unfit, we can actually say, well, actually just do a little bit more in your normal life and you will gain some benefit. You're not going to gain as much as the people who are switched on, motivated to do the exercise, but we have a supermarket in the UK called Tesco's, and they've got this saying that every little helps. And we know with physical activity, if somebody says, how much should I do? And in fact, if you say, if you do more than you're currently doing, there is some benefit. And I'm really interested in just getting people to literally take that first step towards being more active. And so these devices, we need to share them amongst the unconverted as well as the converted.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Buckley. Tom, you've introduced this phrase, this word democracy. I suppose what you could argue is that the way heart attacks hit indiscriminately, there's democracy to that. You know, there's no rhyme or reason to it very often, and it sounds like that was the case for you. So what are your final thoughts on your situation now with your ablation, your first ablation a few days away?
Apprehension, but let's go for it. It goes without saying that I'm indebted to the skills of all the specialists and advisors that have worked with me, including the rehab team. But really, as a layperson on this panel, it seems to me that personal healthcare, as we've been talking about, things like the Frontier X, are starting to generate a lot more information than we've previously seen. ECG, cardiac performance. And now we can have that throughout exercise, whether we're exercising at home, outdoors in the local park, or elsewhere. And that, to me, is going to enable new insights into our health and show things, and did in my case, that we would previously have been missed. Somehow we need to find that data. We need to take responsibility for monitoring the results. And I was interested to hear about the cardiac athlete program, because that might well be a key part of how we monitor and filter the information. It is true, I think, the new information is becoming available remotely. So we don't have to be, as we used to be, face-to-face with our cardiologists or our specialists. We can do it remotely, as we're doing this seminar remotely now, and it works. So it does seem that the traditional doctor-patient relationships are moving, more collaborative. It's more a sharing of knowledge and information and decision-making, and I think that's very welcome.
Well said. Thank you very much indeed, Tom, for those thoughts. Now, I know Dr. Upendra Kaul is not with us live, but we have got some final thoughts from him, I understand.
I think, like many other things which we have learned from the COVID era, are going to stay, like this telemedicine, like video calls, reduction in the physical visits to for chronic stable patients for the long term this thing. Similarly, these devices have become an important part of it. That means that transmitting the ECG is a reality now. You don't have to put on 24 hours, 48 hours Holter monitors because they're cumbersome, and you can't go to toilet, bathroom, wash because you have to disconnect it. So this kind of a device is so easy to use, and I think it's going to be very, very useful for arrhythmia detection, which is extremely important, and for acute symptoms, to differentiate between an ECG of acute coronary syndrome versus chest pain, which is because of myalgia, which is because of musculoskeletal reasons. This is extremely useful. Of course, the doctor has to have a needle of suspicion. If a diabetic with a hypertension and a previous heart attack complains of chest pain, and even if your device is showing a normal ECG, don't take it, it's normal. You have to repeat it and use some other methods also. But I think this is the device which is going to be the game changer. We call it the game changer in cardiac treatment, getting a lot of information which is of therapeutic benefit, diagnostic benefit, sitting at home, passing it on to a treating doctor miles away, maybe in a different city also. It's so easy, whether you transmit it to Greater Kailash or you transmit it to Meerut or to Srinagar or to Trivandrum, is the same technology as long as you have a connectivity.
Well, Dr. Kaul there giving us his thoughts, and again highlighting the benefit of the device. Now, we're gradually reaching the end of proceedings. Sandeep, I know you've want to give a vote of thanks to all the panelists.
Sure. Absolutely. I'll go ahead. If you have time for Q&A, maybe you can take a couple of questions. But once again, thank you so much, Tim, for moderating this and hosting, all of us here at this virtual panel. Paula, thank you so much for your time and your perspectives and as an elite athlete. Tom, obviously, as a person who's been a user, I think it's been very interesting hearing your story, and thank you for coming and joining us here. Dr. Ashish Contractor, it's been a real pleasure again hearing your perspectives as a runner and a cardiac rehab athlete, cardiac rehab specialist, and Professor Buckley for your really advanced ideas and astute thoughts on the topic as well. I think if I'd like to leave all the participants here with a message, I think it's the one that Dr. Ashish Contractor mentioned, which is exercise is great for the heart. It helps strengthen it. I think the one thing that we need to add is to ensure that we're exercising ourselves in the right zone, not overstraining the heart, ensuring we have no arrhythmias and so on. And I think that's where the new technologies that we've talked about today play a role. I also want to leave all the participants who've spent the last 1 hour with us with a little something. And I wanted to say that for a period of time, we'll be offering all participants a 20% discount on the Frontier X, as well as on the cardiac athlete program that we're initiating today. Please do visit fourthfrontier.com to understand this a little bit more in detail. And what I will do is also at the end of this, share a little screen that specifies, the discount code SmartHeart 2020, as well as where you would need to go to avail of this offer. So thanks everyone to being on this. Tim, would you want to, with a few minutes left, would you want to take a few questions from the audience?
Absolutely, yes. I know that many people have been sending questions. We obviously can't deal with every single one. I think there are dozens, but one or two choice ones have come through to us. Pranali has asked, what precautions should be taken while exercising in patients who have ASD devices placed in their heart? Is that one for you, Professor Buckley? Or Ashish, excuse me.
Okay, I can take. ASD normally stands for atrial septal defect. It's what we commonly call as a hole in the heart. You have the left side of the heart and the right side, and the twain shall never meet normally. But sometimes people are born with a little hole in the heart, and the impure and the pure blood mix. Now, once that ASD is fixed, normally it's surgically fixed. Once the ASD is fixed, usually there should be no limitations to the individual. Of course, each case is different, and I'm not commenting on this specific individual, but in general, once an ASD is fixed, the person should be able to lead a normal life.
Okay, thank you, Ashish. We'll try and crack through some of these questions very quickly, and apologies if it seems that we're rushing, but we want to attend to as many of them as possible. Costas has asked, can we just confirm whether the advice is to wear a mask when doing moderate intensity exercise outdoors? For example, walking in the countryside with only occasional brief encounters with other individuals, passing at a safe distance, should you wear a mask? If the answer is yes, please justify for what purpose.
Like I said, if you can maintain a 10-foot distance between people, then you can keep the mask down for that time. That's fine.
Michael has asked for you, Dr. Buckley, what are reasonable ways to monitor client-patient exercise intensity at home during home-based activity?
Right, there's two sides to this question. Really, there's the technical and then there's the non-technical. I have a wonderful slide that I've been using for the last 10 or 15 years when I've been teaching. It's got a picture of Paula Radcliffe running, and it's got a picture of a group of cardiac rehab patients exercising in the gym. And the thing is that they both have the same ability in one area, and that's to perceive their level of exertion. And explaining to the patients that if they do enough exercise and they're taught what the right intensity is, they will know how that feels. And I say it's just like Paula Radcliffe. She knows exactly what pace she's running at, not from what's on her watch, but what is in her legs and what's in her breathing, and how quickly the landscape is passing by in her peripheral vision. And the whole point of being more active is you become more in tune with your body. So that, and what we need to do with teach and rehab now, as part of that teaching process, if we can have a monitor that can more precisely get people into the right zone and allow them to learn it, what that feels like. And Paula will have had that because she had her sports science team helping her find that physiologically, and her performance team. And there isn't any reason these days why everybody in the public can't have the same level of support as an elite athlete now in terms of exercising and eating and living life to perform at their optimum.
Okay, thank you, John. Another question, I would request the esteemed panel to opine about the pros and cons of, I think, HIIT versus LIT, HIIT versus LIIT, in brackets, duration, frequency, etc., especially in those over 50, which is me, and want to optimize heart health versus weight loss. Who's up for that one?
I can answer that. So HIIT stands for high intensity interval training, and I assume LIT stands for low intensity. So here's a very simple piece of advice. I would not recommend someone go straight into HIIT. It's become a fad these days across a lot of different high intensity programs. You can do it only if you have a good solid base of low to moderate intensity. Otherwise, you'll end up injuring yourself or hurting yourself. So if you got a nice base of regular moderate intensity exercise, and then you want to do HIIT once in a while, that's totally fine. It's shown to help with things like fat burning, raising your VO2 max, but you need a good baseline first.
Shall I add a little bit to that from the
John? Yes.
Cardiac patients. When we look at the research around this, we have to remember that in the research settings, people have been observed very, very closely And also, the people that want to do it have volunteered to do it. And so there's a safety element to determine with the high intensity training. The other thing is, behaviorally, is it something that people are going to continue with? For most exercise, for most people, not the 20% who are athletically minded, but for the 80% of the population, for most of them, they have to enjoy what they're doing. Doing HIIT, it's a bit like going on a diet. It's not that enjoyable. It serves a purpose for a while, but can you maintain it? So there's a behavioral and there's a physiological side to that. I've just hit my water bottle, so so, you know, it can be safe if done properly, but and behaviorally, is it something you can sustain? Or is it just, you know, a bit of a nice thing to do for a while?
Thank you, Professor Buckley, John. Yeah, part of your lifestyle. Another question. I had AF, atrial fibrillation, and I had a catheter ablation 12 months ago, which was completely successful, although I'm aware that it can return. I keep track of my heart rate and health with a Garmin Phoenix 5 Plus, but what extra benefits would this device, the Frontier X, give me? Is that for you, Sandeep?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think I've been myself a user of the Garmin Phoenix devices for some time, and the Forerunner before that, back before 2010 as well. And I think it's extremely useful in terms of giving you an idea of what you're doing. How fast are you running? How long have you run? Time, distance, and so on. I think you can think of the Frontier X as sort of giving you an idea of what I call the inner GPS. Not what you're doing, but how you're doing. So, for example, a lot of the interesting data points that have been discussed today at the seminar, like, for example, ECG, we talked about QT intervals, cardiac strain, ST depression and elevation, arrhythmias, and so on. All of this information is something that is best picked off from the chest. So the device, the Frontier X, is actually very useful if you have more than just interested in speed and distance, but actually want to understand what's happening inside, and using that information not just for health purposes, but also to guide you through your exercise training. To the point that Professor Buckley had made and Paula made earlier, to tune into yourself and understand using your breathing and your cardiac performance as to what the optimum zone is for exercise. So in some sense, it's a complement really to the Garmin Phoenix device that the questioner asked. That's the way I would think of it.
Just a very quick point, Tim. With a Garmin or with a heart rate monitor, it cannot tell you about atrial fibrillation because it gives you the heart rate. It doesn't give you the quality of the ECG. So if you do not measure your ECG, you cannot diagnose atrial fibrillation.
Thank you for that, Ashish. Right, Nick Samuels had a question. Where's it gone? Incredible webinar, very insightful. Thanks all. Interested to know Professor Buckley's view on cardiac rehab for ARVC patients. Is exercise safe for these people?
Tough question. First thing is, what do we define as exercise? ARVC is arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy. I even had to just review that in my mind. Dr. Contractor might want to comment, but I can't give a blanket recommendation on a question like that. It needs careful evaluation. But when we talk about exercise, what do people mean by this? And we have light intensity exercise, moderate intensity exercise, high intensity exercise. Depending on who you are and what you need to do, you can gain benefits from being active in any one of those zones. And we have to just have to design the program to what's both safe and beneficial to the patient, to the client. And if we can monitor people, we can determine at what level they're going to be safe. And we can only push people to the limit of safety. And lots of watches give you zones to work on, but they're not specific to that person. They're specific to a population. And so when it says one size fits all, it means it doesn't actually fit anybody. So You know, light intensity activity to Paula Radcliffe is high intensity exercise to me. She can do a light workout at 6 minutes a mile. That's her warm up. And I was happy to run a half marathon at the age of 30 at that pace. And she would have been going around twice as quick almost. So I think we need to be careful of how we define what exercise is for each individual.
Ashish, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just, ARVC potentially could be something which needs serious evaluation. So I think he must meet with his doctor, preferably a sports cardiologist who understands it, and then based on the patterns of his ECG, he can be given exercise advice. It would be difficult to give advice over a webinar like this.
Okay, thank you. One further question. A patient after treatment of supraventricular tachycardia by cardiac ablation, can the patient exercise normally after the recovery and treatment? What are the precautions that should be taken who had SVT? Can this condition recur? Please explain.
So supraventricular tachycardia is relatively a benign condition. Supraventricular means above the ventricle. In other words, it's the atria tachycardia, which is far less dangerous than a ventricular tachycardia. And in general, if an ablation was done, the person should be fine and the chance of recurrence are not very high. In general, again, please make sure that each individual who's asking these questions checks with their local doctor, because obviously every single case is different. What I'm giving you are general guidelines.
Okay, thank you. From Peter to all panelists, we exercise cardio training to strengthen the heart, but if we don't follow the proper schedule, are there any chances to harm the heart instead of strengthening?
Yes.
Ashish? Oh.
Yes, I mean, if you do it wrongly, you can damage yourself. I mean, you got to be, you got to do something pretty crazy to damage yourself. But more likely, you might damage yourself from a musculoskeletal point of view before you even damage yourself, from a heart point of view, if you do silly stuff.
And we were talking yesterday, Ashish, and there is a slight correlation between athletes who train incredibly hard, let's say world-class or extreme end athletes in high level training programs, and the preponderance of some issue with the heart.
That is true. So sometimes they have things like scarring of the heart muscle, which might give rise to things like atrial fibrillation. However, the long-term impact of that is poorly understood. So as of now, the jury is out there. But in general, athletes live healthier and longer lives than non-athletes. We know that for sure. So I don't think that we need to be unduly alarmed about these things at this point, but they are under study.
I think people have to appreciate that being a high-level professional athlete is an occupational hazard. And people take on those risks and they put their bodies through extreme cases, but usually they stop doing them by the time they get to 35. When the body decides that it can't cope with that level. So, and anything, but on balance, there are benefits outweigh the risks, but people should stop behaving as if they want to be world champion after the age of 35, because their body does take longer to recover and they can't perform as well as they used to. And often we see people having acute cardiac events, say on the squash court, because they haven't played for 20 years and their mindset is age 25, but their body is 50. And they don't realize that they've got, some plaque in their arteries or something, and they push it too hard. So, again, there's two ends of the spectrum. There's the carrot and the stick. And we have to find a good balance between the two.
Thank you, Professor Buckley. Could the Fourth Frontier device replace a Bruce protocol stress ECG if enough sensors are installed? I've been asked by my cardiologist to undertake a stress ECG, but that is impossible due to COVID-19. The Fourth Frontier device, the Frontier X, seems a possible replacement for the Bruce protocol. Is that one for you, Professor Buckley?
I guess it is. It's my brother. Margaret asked me a question.
It's your brother?
Yes, I know it is. And since he's revealed himself, his occupation requires him to have a stress test. He likes to ride his bike, and he's been and could he send the results to his cardiologist, because every so often he has to have a stress test because of his work. So the question is, we still don't know what the work rate is on the bike. And what we need to add into this equation is if we could put in what the oxygen cost of the VO2 or the METs, if we could know more accurately what that is, then essentially we could potentially do that. But the other side of the Bruce protocol is it's got a 12-lead ECG, and it picks up all elements of the heart, where the frontier, the limitation of the frontier, can't do everything. It's a 2 or 3 lead ECG, so you can't see a full picture of the heart with it. It picks up the arrhythmias clearly, but using it for diagnosis for coronary disease, which is the other factor that causes a heart attack, you will need a 12-lead ECG to see if people have that.
The Frontier X device can be worn, continually, running, cycling, swimming, doing whatever you want, and be providing live data while you're doing those activities. So it does make it incredibly, incredibly convenient, I suppose, Sandeep. Are there any developments in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Yes, absolutely. And I just wanted to add a little bit to what John mentioned in response to the questions, that he just answered. And that is that we have actually done extensive studies on people's hearts, 1 hour, 2 hours, sometimes 4 hours, on a long exercise session, a marathon, for example. We did a study with 60 runners at the Mumbai Marathon a year ago. And what we realized was many of the manifestations and changes in the heart were actually not picked up on the stress test ECGs, because they were typically for 10 or 15 minutes. And a lot of this data reveal things that, these individuals had never seen, not unlike the case of the 30-year-old 2-hour 15 marathoners data that I had shown. They just didn't know it existed, because these issues manifested only on very extensive, long duration, exercise sessions, which could not have been caught in a 15-minute stress test ECG. We've got a lot of data now. We've done this on, tens of thousands of exercise sessions and over 1.2 million or so 20-second ECG segments of people really pushing themselves hard. So I think what's interesting is, while it isn't a 12-lead ECG, quite like John said, it is providing a view into a zone in which people push themselves, that has actually never been studied. People actually have never looked at this. So seeing ECG segments of people 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours into a run, and what's happening to the hearts, is a completely new zone, in a completely new domain that's not been explored up until we picked up this data from our device. 1/3 of those runners, of the 60 runners who ran, actually had pushed themselves into a zone that's generally considered unhealthy, but they didn't know it.
We can add to that. We have many athletes that have screening before they get their £1 million transfer, and they have these tests. The one thing you can't add into the test is all of the adrenaline and excitement that's going on during the match. So they've exhausted themselves, and you have a boost of adrenaline going into the system. That is very hard to replicate in a clinic for 10 or 12 minutes. So that's the upside of that. But if we can get a more complete picture of the heart with these remote monitors, then we really are onto something really good.
Okay, Professor Buckley, thank you very much indeed. It's now gone well past, almost 20 minutes past our allotted slot. I know all of you had agreed to go on for a little longer. Thank you very much indeed for your time, but I think we'll probably wrap things up at this stage. Obviously, there's plenty of information on the Fourth Frontier website, and I believe that a recording of this webinar, this seminar, will be available for some time afterwards. Sandeep, any closing comment before we say goodbye to everybody?
No, well, I just want to add that the moment we stop speaking, there's going to be a little image which will tell people where to go if they want to purchase the product, they want to avail of the cardiac athlete program. And you're absolutely right. The video will be available, in a few hours from now for posterity. So you can, if you missed something or a colleague of yours wanted to be on the webinar but couldn't be, you can actually look at it. You can play it back. Just visit fourthfrontier.com in a few hours and you should be able to see it. Once again, thanks everyone, and a very happy World Heart Day for everyone. I hope we all lead healthy, happy lives, and exercise a lot.
Absolutely. Sandeep, thank you very much indeed. Tom, good luck with your ablations next week.
Thank you.
Ashish, Professor Buckley,
Thank you.
and Paula, thank you very much indeed. And for everybody who's been attending for this last hour and more, thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.